Coercive control is the umbrella term used to describe many of the non-physical forms of domestic violence. And so these types of abuse are used to control, to dominate, to manipulate, frighten, confuse, and threaten another person.
So coercive control is a pattern of abusive behaviour. So we know it as domestic violence, and there are a variety of strategies that perpetrators use. And in coercive control, we can see that there's a pattern of behaviour that's associated with that. So it's not a single incident.
Coercive control is a series of behaviours that often focus a lot on psychological abuse that seek to limit a person's movements, their decisions over their own lives. It's a form of abuse that leaves victims questioning their own sense of judgment and often makes them feel like that everything's their fault, when in actual fact it's the perpetrator of the abuse that is using manipulation to exert power and control over the other person, the victim.
Coercive control can start as quite little things, small things, like a partner telling his partner that she can't wear a bikini or that she can't wear shorts, or calling her constantly to find out where she is, which might seem to some people pretty harmless, but then it can escalate into more serious forms of control around controlling access to finances, limiting people's social connections, cutting partners off from their family, from their friends, controlling their movements, monitoring what they do, and belittling them and humiliating them.
So one of the tactics of coercive control is isolating a family member, a partner. So that can be geographically moving to a different place. It can be removing them from their social circles, creating issues so that they become removed from their family. It might be creating issues for them at work so that they are then removing themselves from their work colleagues. And it really is just about creating issues in that person's life so that they become isolated from friends, family, support networks.
So isolation and isolating a victim survivor is really about not only physically isolating them from family, friends, work, community, but certainly emotionally isolating someone. It might be suggesting that no one at work likes them, that community groups or organisations that they may want to be a part of are really about just exploiting them. Family disagree and think that, there's something wrong with her. So there's a range of strategies that perpetrators use to isolate their victim survivors.
Isolation is a form of abuse when a partner realises that their partner gets a lot of satisfaction and support and emotional nourishment from their friends and family. And so quite often a person can be confronted by that, and knowing that by isolating their partner from that emotional nourishment from their social contacts will make them feel more isolated, less supported. They have no one really to turn to talk to about their problems, and they really lose contact with any sort of friends and family that could support them and provide that emotional support, and also a sounding board for that person to talk to, particularly if they've got concerns about their relationship and the way that it's unfolding.
So monitoring in an abusive relationship is a tactic used by the perpetrator, and it's about keeping tabs on what their partner or ex-partner is doing. So it can be demanding to know where they are, demanding that they check in all the time. It can be looking at their phone, wanting to know who they've been in contact with. It can be calling workplaces, calling university, calling school to find out what they're doing. It can be keeping tabs on them by calling friends. It can be by using spyware on phones or setting up security cameras in the home.
So monitoring activities when you're experiencing coercive control can include monitoring your mobile phone, taking your phone off you and reading all your text messages, and it can actually include installation of apps like on technology that you're not aware of, so that the perpetrator of the violence is aware of where you are at all times. Other forms of technology that could be used in a way of coercive control can be installation of cameras, and saying that that's for safety, but it's actually being used to monitor the victim's behaviours. It can also be limiting access to friends and family, or to employment, or only allowing you to go certain places at certain times.
Yeah, well, monitoring can be really insidious. There's many examples of partners who put software onto their partners' phones to monitor their movements, to monitor their text messages, to record their voice calls. Also putting monitoring devices into cars so that they can determine the location of their partner at any time, and also keep track of where their partner is going, who they're seeing, what activities they're participating in. There's also instances where cameras are put into soft toys in the house, into children's rooms, into parts of the kitchen, so that any time the partner can monitor what their partner is doing from afar and without that person's knowledge.
So monitoring can be a whole range of different things. Certainly women talk about having cameras in their homes. That's a very overt way of monitoring what's going on. It may include things like stalking. They may have third-party stalking or monitoring what their partner's doing, and certainly would include electronic monitoring.
So financial abuse can be limiting, with coercive control, can be limiting access to your bank account, using your key card to rack up bills and things that you haven't consented to. It can also be convincing you to shut down your own personal accounts and open a joint account so that there can be increased monitoring as well. It can be getting you to sign documents for loans where you don't fully understand what the ramifications are of the loans that you're taking out.
Financial abuse is where a perpetrator of violence will restrict access to financial assets for their partner or ex-partner. And this can be done in a variety of ways. So it may be restricting your partner from being able to work, so being able to earn an income. It might be not allowing them to hold a bank card, a credit card. It might be not allowing them to know the PIN number of the credit card or bank card. It might be joining assets together so that you've got more control, the perpetrator has more control over the bank account. It could also be taking out large loans in their partner's name, often without their partner's knowledge.
Yeah, well, financial abuse is when someone is so controlling around finances that a person has no empowerment around making their own plans, around how a budget is fairly spent in the partnership. So, financial control can be as restrictive as a person having absolutely no access to money or bank accounts unless they ask permission and unless they can account for how every single cent is spent, and unless the partner agrees to the way that money is being spent. So essentially, some women end up with such financial abuse that they can make no decisions about discretionary spending, even for a cup of coffee, to buy, a loved family member a gift for their birthday or a card. They have absolutely no access to funding, and that is a real deprivation of right.
So financial abuse is one that sometimes isn't necessarily recognised as financial abuse, and we know that in a partnership, if one person can't work, the other one will contribute. In domestic violence and coercive control, that pattern of abuse sets the victim survivor up to not have access to finances, which means that they could get away. So it might be limiting the amount of money that they can use. It might be incurring debts in their name without the product. It may be having to account for money or just having that control over who's making the decisions around finances.
Gaslighting is a form of abuse that makes you doubt your own experience of reality. So the perpetrator of this form of abuse will often do abusive behaviours, and then when the victim questions them about what they've done, then the person who's doing the gaslighting will say, "Oh no, that didn't happen," and try and make the person really question their version of reality. And it can be very damaging to people's sense of self, because if you're repeatedly told that what you're experiencing isn't happening, then you can believe over time that in actual fact you're causing the abuse when you're not, when someone's actually perpetrating that type of abuse against you.
Well, gaslighting and psychological abuse is so insidious because it's so intangible. It starts with a partner undermining someone, engaging in quite manipulative and controlling behaviours, but then actually making the partner think that it's all in their head. So if the partner starts to say, I don't like the way you're behaving, or I feel that your behaviour is controlling, these partners can be so manipulative that they can position it that the person is paranoid, that they have some mental health issues, or that they might be depressed, and that is what is causing them to come to these conclusions, when in fact the person is not depressed or having mental health issues or paranoid. That person has legitimate concerns about the way they are being treated and manipulated, and that in itself is very painful and confusing, and it's further confused by this psychological abuse or gaslighting to make them think it's all in their head or that they're imagining it.
So psychological abuse is one of those prominent forms of domestic violence. So when we find that physical abuse, so physical harm, occurs in some cases, generally psychological abuse occurs in all cases. So psychological abuse it can also be, people use the term emotional abuse or verbal abuse, is all incorporated within psychological abuse. So it can be things like name calling, constantly telling a person that they're crazy. It can be sort of manipulating, using tactics which make the victim of abuse question their sense of reality, question their place in the world, question their connection with others, so that they're constantly feeling like they're walking on eggshells. So psychological abuse can take on many different forms, and it is actually really damaging.
Gaslighting really undermines a victim survivor's confidence and capacity to know that they know things. So psychological abuse, certainly gaslighting would be a part of that psychological abuse, but it may also be things like having them committed to mental health services. It may be constantly shifting the goalposts, if you will. So changing what expectations are, keeping the ground underneath them a little bit shaky.
Pregnancy coercion is forcing you to make choices that you don't want to make. So it can be related to if you are pregnant and you're seeking termination, blocking access to support services or information that could help you to seek out a termination.
Pregnancy coercion is where a perpetrator of abuse tries to or does take control of their partner or ex-partner's decision-making around their body. So again, this can take on a number of different forms. It can be restricting access to termination services or neonatal services. It could be tampering with birth control. It could be restricting access to birth control. So it really is about maintaining control, taking control away from their partner or ex-partner around the decisions for their body so that the abusive person can maintain control, maintain domination.
You know, partners will feel that if their partner is pregnant, that then that limits their options in terms of leaving, or it might make them feel more psychologically bound to them in terms of staying in the relationship. And so even if the person doesn't really want to be pregnant, you know, that person might remove their contraceptive pills or hide them or replace them with pills that are not contraceptive pills, or not use a condom or other contraceptive in an effort to get that person pregnant, because they feel that once that person is pregnant, they're more easily controlled, they're more likely to want to stay in a relationship, and they're more likely to stay with the partner.
So pregnancy coercion has certainly come, our knowledge of this has come out more recently with a lot of research. And what they've identified is that pregnancy coercion is a perpetrator gaining power and control over someone's fertility. So that may be restricting access to contraceptives, that may be agreeing to use contraceptives and then changing their mind. So say something like using condoms and then saying he's not going to use them, or sabotaging birth control. It may be insisting on terminations or restricting access to terminations. It's really about saying, I'm going to have that control over your fertility. So it's about choice, or a lack of choice.
Coercive control is a really dangerous and often deadly form of domestic violence. One of the reasons it is so dangerous is that it's insidious, it's hidden. Often, if people are subject to coercive control, they may lack the telltale signs of domestic violence, such as bruises, broken bones, and this can make it really difficult to report the abuse. It can be really difficult to have other services, such as police, believe that the abuse is occurring. And oftentimes then people who are subject to coercive control may not be confident to report to authorities. This means that the abuse goes on unchecked, and we do know that it can lead to deadly consequences.
Coercive control is actually a very dangerous form of psychological abuse. It has been shown that that many people experience coercive control, and there may not be necessarily physical assault as a marker of coercive control. But there can be high rates of death as a result of coercive control over a number of years. So it's really important that we don't dismiss when women are experiencing the coercive control that is the psychological abuse. We need to listen and support that and not dismiss it if there's doesn't have an element of physical assault in it, because it's one of the high risk factors for domestic homicide.
Coercive control is really dangerous because it impacts the mental health and stability of women who are victims of that abuse, and it's really intangible. So someone who is experiencing coercive control might feel like their liberties are being constrained, or they might feel like they're being overly harassed about their movements or what they're doing, or that they don't have enough freedom on their discretionary spending. So it's really hard for them to define and to recognise in the first place that their partner is actually abusing them. And we see examples all the time where when that sort of coercive control starts, a woman thinks it's lovely that her partner's calling her 5 to 10 times a day because that is positioned as a caring thing to do, until later in the relationship, it's more menacing, and it is about controlling, and finding out where are you, and timing people. All right, well, if you're leaving work now, you've got 5 minutes to get home, or there will be punishment, there'll be some kind of retribution, silent treatment, or abuse, verbal abuse. So it's a really hard thing to define. It's very hard for the person in the relationship to recognise. And unfortunately, it usually starts with the small things and it escalates into really damaging and dangerous behaviour.
Look, any form of coercive control is extremely dangerous. We know that women wake up in these unhealthy relationships, and the first thing they're thinking about is what happens, what have I got to do today to keep myself and my children safe? It's the first thing. So women lack any sense of choice in their own life. They certainly don't have the capacity to create the sort of environment for their family that they wish to. We know that over time, that cycle of violence will spiral, so that it may happen multiple times a day, and where those boundaries continue to be broken, it's only, a relatively simple 8 steps to domestic homicide, and that's really frightening.